Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're taking a deeply atmospheric spatial tour through what is basically a beautifully rendered nightmare. We're going to meticulously deconstruct the Gothic tropes, the environmental storytelling, and those escalating supernatural threats that make horror art just so viscerally effective. Our goal here is to figure out exactly how visual artists manipulate things like architecture, lighting, and scale to drag our emotions from, just a mild unease all the way to outright terror. Along the way, we'll be paying special attention to how elements like the old Gothic houses, a particularly grim hanging corpse, and a massive giant lurker all work together to build this incredible tension.
Leave before dark. It's a simple, chilling warning, right? But it acts as our absolute guide here, establishing a hard rule that any safety in this environment is entirely conditional upon the sun. Okay, just take a look at how the hauntingly beautiful, yet totally imposing architecture creates this baseline of quiet dread. We're placed right at the edge of a graveyard here, surrounded by these overgrown, leafless trees and those glowing jack-o'-lanterns that almost feel like eerie little sentinels watching us. And look at the old Gothic houses packed tightly together in the background. Their sharp, angular roofs are literally piercing that moody autumnal sky. There's this brilliant juxtaposition going on. You've got the warm, seemingly inviting orange glow coming from the windows, fighting against the really cold, encroaching darkness of the shadows outside. It completely draws you in, making you wonder who or what is actually safe inside, especially with those shadowy figures lingering right by the doorways. It's honestly a masterclass in establishing a setting that feels lived in, but fundamentally hostile. Now, as we moved into the town square, notice the intensely claustrophobic arrangement of these buildings. The architecture is actively working against us now. Those steep, towering roofs and the slick, tight streets create this awful maze-like quality. Just look at the few remaining villagers huddled down by the dimly lit stalls. Their posture screams apprehension, not community, The buildings are looming over them, leaning in at these unnatural angles that effectively trap them in the square. That massive stone structure anchoring the scene really drives home the idea that these old Gothic houses are functioning way more like a prison than a sanctuary. The lighting is incredibly sparse, focusing only on where human activity is desperately clinging to normalcy, leaving everything else drenched in an impenetrable gloom.
Walking down these streets, you literally can't help but feel watched. Look up at that suffocating, sickly green hue in the clouds rolling over the spires. The entire color palette has completely shifted from those warm autumnal oranges to a toxic, supernatural green. That immediately signals to us that the curse on this town runs way deeper than just the shadows. And those twisted, dead branches scraping against the sky, they almost mimic grasping claws reaching out over the illuminated cobblestones. Every single street lamp seems to exist only to highlight how terrifyingly empty and desolate the path is, pulling your eyes straight down that slick, wet road right into the foggy unknown. It's an incredibly effective use of leading lines, dragging you deeper and deeper into the danger.
So, what happens when the rain starts falling? Well, the atmosphere we've been navigating is about to seriously show its teeth. Suddenly, the subtlety is completely stripped away. Here, grim environmental storytelling takes center stage with a gruesome hanging corpse in the pouring rain, dangling right over the street. This isn't just a spooky shadow in an alleyway anymore. This is a definitive, horrific warning screaming at us that this town is actively, lethally dangerous. The rain adds such an oppressive physical weight to the scene, literally washing out all the colors into these harsh, cold grays and blues. And if you look closely, the crows circling in that ominous sky above the Gothic spires just reinforce the suffocating presence of death. This stark imagery shatters any lingering illusion of a quiet village. It replaces it with the reality of a brutal, unforgiving nightmare. So, the crucial takeaway here is that escape has become entirely impossible. If you try to navigate your way out of the town limits, this is the chilling scene you're met with. A lone, lantern-lit carriage, stopped dead at a fork in the road, right next to this dilapidated wooden signpost adorned with a bleached skull. Even the muddy roads leading out look like literal traps waiting to be sprung on unsuspecting travelers. Check out the twisted roots of that massive dead tree on the side. They seem to be writhing right across the path. And those glowing red eyes hidden deep in its base? Yeah, they strongly suggest that the wilderness outside is just as cursed as the architecture inside. The fact that the graveyard bleeds right up to the edge of the road tells the traveler that no matter which path they choose, death is going to be a constant companion. Turn back now. Heeding this final, desperate warning, our journey actually pushes us out of the architectural maze of the town and straight into the rotting harvest grounds. Out here on the fringes, things change. The towering Gothic mansions rot away into these dilapidated, broken-down wooden shacks. And the presence of those massive crows, which are unsettlingly large compared to the actual buildings, tells us that the town's corruption hasn't just infected the people, it has spread deep into the earth itself. There's this thick white fog rolling in, totally obscuring the horizon and isolating everything. The few remaining glowing pumpkins sitting in the mud serve as the only visual anchors in a space that feels entirely devoid of hope. The horror out here isn't just claustrophobia, it's total decay and abandonment.
Now, when you compare the two environments, a really profound story emerges, visually. We had the claustrophobic dread of the town, which felt intimate and architectural. But out in the fields, the scale expands into this colossal supernatural territory. It visually communicates a terrifying idea. The town was merely the bait. It was just a smaller, contained horror meant to distract you from the inescapable, godlike nature of the curse that truly governs this whole Lent. And that brings us to the breathtaking climax of the harvest. Just take a second to really absorb the sheer terrifying scale of this entity. We are looking at a giant lurker over the pumpkin fields composed of what looks like vines, earth, in pure shadow, completely dominating the landscape. It represents an overwhelming nightmare that entirely dwarfs those helpless onlookers down in the foreground. Notice the two small figures, an adult and a child, clutching just a single lantern, their backs to us as they stare up in absolute terror at this behemoth. Suddenly, the glowing eyes of all the pumpkins scattered across the field feel less like decorations and more like an audience to this horrific revelation. Even the Gothic ruins of the town church sitting quietly in the midground seem utterly powerless against this ancient, massive thing stalking the horizon. This is absolutely where the environmental storytelling peaks, proving that the rot in the town was really just a symptom of the disease living out in the fields.
So as we wrap up our explainer and stand at the edge of this terrifying place, we're left to reflect on how masterfully horror art can manipulate our perception. Think about the journey we just took, from the glowing, claustrophobic streets of those old Gothic houses, past the brutal reality of that hanging corpse in the rain, and finally into the shadow of the massive giant lurker. It was all a carefully orchestrated descent. It really begs the question, is the real horror the giant waiting out in the open fields? Or is it the deceptively quiet town that deliberately, step by step, led you right to it? Keep your eyes open, and whatever you do, leave before dark.